What's up, guys? McJibbin here. Another reaction video. This time, another feature history video. The second Opium War. I already reacted to the first Opium War by Feature History. You can check that out on my channel. And like every time, original video down at the top of the description below. Definitely check out this guy. Very well done videos. A lot of one of the recommended already is first Sino-Japanese War, something that I'm interested in and would love to react to. So I'm sure I'll do that one in the next few videos I put out. Let's get into it. First, feature history, second Opium War, go.
CuriosityStream has fed and clothed me,
and I can see here
curiositystream.com/feature history and get 26% off an annual plan to both their site and Nebula. Hello and welcome back to Feature History, as I once again go back to Far East Asia, just like British war vessels did. Because in our previous feature we ran through the first Opium War, the painful lessons and consequences of it, that were blatantly ignored at the time. Instead, it took a second war, a bigger war, to crumble the Celestial Empire and strip it of its power and influence. And so, we go back to the time of the young Zhenfeng Emperor, where, just like he did, we're going to pick up where the old one left off. After the Qing defeat at the end of the First War, the state entered its century of humiliation, where Chinese hegemony decayed greatly. External conflicts plagued the Qing, but internal conflicts threatened its very existence. The Americans and French would jump onto the bandwagon and force the Qing into unequal treaties, reaping similar concessions as the Brits. Alongside this, most of the country became embroiled in the brutal and staggeringly costly Taiping Rebellion. The Qing state fought several disparate rebellions, most importantly including the Christian theocracy of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. The Zhenfeng Emperor would be forced to delegate his powers to skilled generals, creating influential warlords in the state. These warlords would successfully quell the rebellion, but with their own growing power and the loss of tens of millions
sorry to rewind it, but I want to make sure I hear that last.
Delegate his powers to skilled generals, creating influential warlords in the state.
Okay, so
these warlords would successfully quell the rebellion, but with their own growing power and the loss of tens of millions of lives in the conflict, the Qing Empire was decentralized and weakened. During these times, tensions with the British and other Western nations stayed high. The Qing didn't uphold the clause in the Treaty of Nanking to legalize opium. Furthermore, the populace was understandably hostile to Europeans, and the Qing officials
how can you expect them to? Again, I'm definitely not perfect in this area when it comes to history in the Far East, and I guess as Western contact comes in, I know a little bit more. But how can you just expect them to? It's as if they're not even trying to compromise with the Chinese, the British, and mainly the British, but Americans and I think it said French. Like it's clearly, this is making us, first of all, we don't want to be dependent on anything Western, and this is creating a bunch of opium addicts in the country, creating disorder, and it could lead to you being more easily conquered, which I'm sure it seems like the West knows that and is just trying to push it anyway. So you got to kind of agree with the term unequal treaties. It's pretty blatantly that unequal.
Crack down on this because, well, they didn't like them either. Because of this, the British responded in the way they knew worked with the Qing. In 1847, a small fleet took to the Pearl River, capturing ports, forcing their entrance into Canton, and imposing their own order on the populace. This punitive expedition showed the British had no hesitation in using force to get what they wanted.
Trying to get a second India
and foreign powers was uneasy at best. All it took was a little provocation.
Probably,
the Qing Navy in October.
Even more potential economic benefit if you're not looking at the cost of destroying a country and everything, and just looking at trying to keep the money flowing in and the products, then China, I think, would be an even bigger prize than India.
October of 1856 would successfully capture a pirate vessel in Canton. This ship was called the Arrow, and yes, it was a pirate ship. But at that moment, it was a registered shipping vessel under British jurisdiction. 12 of the 14 crew were imprisoned, and Harry Parkes, the British consul in Canton, soon demanded their release, along with an apology. Governor of Guangdong Yi Ming-chun would release 9 of the crew, but refused the release of the 3 others. In response, the British took up another expedition, destroying several forts in the Pearl River and demanding entry into Canton. Yi would reject, and Canton came under bombardment, inciting months of skirmishing between the two navies and seeing the burning of several foreign-owned warehouses. The British would return to Hong Kong in January of 1857, preceding talks for some sort of settlement. However, in the same month, hundreds of Europeans received arsenic poisoning from the Chinese-owned and operated Yixing Bakery in Hong Kong. The Chinese bakers were held responsible, and tensions rose between Europeans and the Chinese. The intention of the arsenic poisoning isn't really known, but the British government was happy to take to assuming. Parliament was presented with a vote on whether or not to expand the conflict with the Qing, and it was ultimately vetoed in March. Prime Minister Lord Palmerston, being a staunch nationalist with interest in East Asia, would go ahead and dissolve Parliament in response. The Yixing Bakery incident was used to garner public support, and Palmerston's party would win dozens of seats in Parliament after the general election. The Parliament vote returned, and this time passed. Britain proposed a coalition with the Russians, French, and Americans. Only the French accepted, citing the execution of a French missionary in China. Truly, it was just that Napoleon III had his own interests, wishing to project French prestige and dominance into East Asia. The Russians and Americans would pledge neutrality, a neutrality neither of them would really keep.
Just want to get something out of my head that's kind of unrelated but kind of brought up. I really want to know, I have no idea what happened in like French history between when Napoleon died, or when the Napoleonic Wars ended, and the beginning of the First World War. I guess there was Prussia and stuff. That different topic for a different time, but yeah.
Given revolt in India, major fighting was delayed for months. British and French forces assembled in Hong Kong and finally made an incursion against Canton in December. They made demands for the release of the remaining 3 prisoners, and it was given. But their forces were denied entry into the city, and truly, the most shocking of all, they didn't get an apology. With great ease, the massively outnumbered coalition forces took the walls, burnt parts of the city, and captured Yi Ming-chun. The coalition fleet would then move north to Tianjin to force a favourable settlement with the Zhenfeng Emperor. They would capture the Dagu forts in May of 1858, and the Qing would open up to negotiation. The neutral Russians would have the treaty
so that
of
kind of the mobility, like there are obviously so many people back then as well in China. Obviously, no country has even close to the population it has today, but that the British kind of, even when they're overwhelmed, they kind of just pack up and go somewhere else down the coast. It's obviously a huge advantage, and kind of answers a bit of the question I have in my head of, no matter how advanced technologically you are in your guns and your warfare, if you're so outnumbered, to such an extent, they're going to end up getting you, but you can always flee.
Twin, granting them hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of the Manchurian coastline. The British, French, and once again, neutral parties of Russia and the US would all sign on the Treaty of Tianjin.
Look at those. So stereotypical. Every single one of them is just the perfect stereotype of these countries you could do with minimal amount of effort. Just like a head, not even eyes.
They wanted
Right.
more ports opened, Qing officials forbidden of Christian blasphemy, old ordinance that affected the practice of Christianity nullified, free travel of Europeans in China, and the right to permanent diplomatic embassies in Beijing. Oh, and the opening of the Yangtze, ports opened up in the river, the banning of monopolies
Only
in
fair.
domestic trade, 6 million taels of silver, and how could I forget, the Qing couldn't call Europeans barbarians anymore. Well, the
can't call us
negotiations marked
bad.
a temporary end to fighting and returned the Dagu forts to the Qing. But the Qing didn't actually ratify or uphold the treaty. As the coalition escorted their diplomatic envoys to Beijing, they were halted by General Sangye Linqin at the Dagu forts. He instructed the coalition they could land at Beitong, but couldn't disembark any military personnel or envoy escorts. So in June of 1859, the coalition destroyed the obstacles in their place and shelled the Dagu forts. They moved to assault the fort and were repelled. The coalition's retreat would be assisted by an American steamship in a very strange display of neutrality. Sangye Linqin was able to sink 3 gunboats and kill over 400 British troops in what became a bungled and disastrous defeat for the coalition. Sangye only lost 32 men.
Wow.
The general stated that while they would return with more ships,
I like his helmet.
with 1 or 2 more victories, the pride and vainglory of the barbarians, already under severe trial, will disappear. Reserves were called from India and a reinforced coalition fleet prepared for assault on the outskirts of the capital. They would take the city of Beitong in August of 1860 and march to the Dagu forts once again. With Sangye absent and the coalition vastly outnumbering the fort's garrison, they captured the stronghold and pressed forward with the advance. Yantai, Dalian, and Tianjin all fell, opening the road to Beijing. The Zhenfeng Emperor sent diplomats to negotiate peace, but when they met Harry Parkes, he insulted them, and they became informed of the imprisonment of the governor of Tianjin. The Qing representatives arrested, tortured, and executed many of Parkes' entourage. This only really prompted the coalition forces to march on to Beijing. Sangye Linqin once again met the 4,000-strong army with his own army of...
Just looking at it from a historical perspective, when you hear, terrible acts or bad acts counted in what is essentially to them wartime, it's always hard to sympathize with the people that are kind of pressing down the on the other person's country. And when it turns to wartime is what I'm trying to get at is a lot of the stuff that can be just seen as plain terrible in historical kind of just analyzing of this. I just kind of try to see myself in both sides' shoes, and it's kind of hard to say where the coalition is correct, but we will see.
30,000. He was repelled and regrouped his forces at Balichao, where Sangye committed his elite Mongol cavalry against the foreigners. Bottlenecked by the 8-mile-long bridge, the repeated doomed frontal charges saw Sangye's men butchered. With the Qing's main fighting force routed, the coalition marched on Beijing. By then, the Zhenfeng Emperor had fled and left his brother Prince Gong to negotiate with the Anglo-French forces. Parkes and what remained of his envoy were freed, and the summer palace was looted and razed as punishment. A humiliating one at that. Prince Gong reaffirmed the remained of his envoy were negotiated with the Anglo-French forces. Parkes and what remained of his envoy were freed, and the summer palace was looted and razed as punishment. A humiliating one at that. Prince Gong reaffirmed and ratified the Treaty of Tianjin from 1858 in the Convention of Peking. The British and French added 1858 in the Convention of Peking. The British and French added further terms, opening Tianjin to trade, ceding the district of Kowloon to Hong Kong, demanding freedom of religion, an additional 2 million taels of silver, and the legalization of opium. The war was a terrific victory for the British and French, reinforcing the popularity of Lord Palmerston. For the Qing, it was truly the beginning of the end, as between the First and Second War they had only deteriorated and lost more than they could have imagined. The Zhenfeng Emperor would isolate himself at the Changda mountain resort, and as his health worsened from his overindulgence, he died in August of 1861 at 30 years old. His only surviving son succeeded him at 5 years old, effectively handing all power to the new emperor's mother, Empress Dowager Shiji. Shiji would oversee moderate reform under the guise of self-strengthening. It was Shiji who held the Qing together a lot longer than many would have expected.
Is that a Gatling gun?
Without the ability or want to fully reform into a modern Western-style nation like Japan had done, it wasn't
that guy's got a nice beard. I'm talking over, I gotta stop. Sorry.
Without the ability or want to fully reform into a modern Western-style nation like Japan had done, it wasn't long for the dynasty. The ancient Celestial Empire had been dragged kicking and screaming into modernity. The 19th century had punished and humiliated the Old Kingdom, and the 20th century wasn't looking any better. China would be doomed to rot and fall apart. There was no hope. At least, not without a major revolution. Oh, would you look at that? A curiosity stream. Pretty good nick too.
Awesome video. So glad I got put onto this channel, or was told about the channel to react to it. I already, when I finish this video, I'm gonna go check out. Might as well just do it right now. No, I can just tell, very well done, like a lot of these other channels. And I always, please, it's kind of one of my goals here, not just to create like a hangout, you know, just react to anything, play a video game maybe in the future. But I love learning on the internet, especially learning about history. I love learning about history. Is so fun to learn about, and especially when other people give you different sources and information, because it all kind of fits into the one big puzzle of what has happened since civilization started. And I think that's so cool. And so it really helps for people to recommend channels and videos down in the comments. It doesn't just have to be history. It can be anything really you think is cool or you'd like me to react to, and I'll do it. Another video I'll have coming out either later today or tomorrow. Check out these videos I put up, other ones on my channel. Check out Future History for sure. And I'll see you guys next time.